I never imagined that love would arrive in my life like this, not with a bang, not with a grand entrance, but with quiet steps that slowly invaded my days. It was subtle at first and unfamiliar warmth that grew with every passing moment, a stirring in my chest I couldn't quite name. I was a man who lived in routine, bound by responsibilities, tied down by unspoken fears. Love was something I had observed from a distance, never something I dared to hold for myself. But then, she entered my world, and everything I thought I knew began to change. The first time I noticed her, really noticed her, it wasn't because of anything grand. It wasn't the way movies describe it, no background music, no magical light. It was in the way she brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, the way her gaze lingered on a book she was reading. Her lips slightly parted as though she was lost in another world. I don't know why, but I felt something in that instant. Something that told me my world had shifted, though I hadn't moved an inch. At first, I tried to ignore it. People cross our paths every day, and most of them leave without leaving a trace. I convinced myself she would be the same, just another face, another moment that would fade. But she didn't fade. In fact, with every passing encounter, she grew clearer, sharper, as if life itself was intent on reminding me that she was there. One day, fate or perhaps coincidence placed us in the same space, with no one else around. The silence between us wasn't heavy, but curious. I could hear my own heartbeat as though it were demanding me to speak. I said something small, something ordinary, just to break the silence. To my surprise, she responded not just with words, but with a smile that lit up her whole face. It was the kind of smile that didn't just reach her lips, but traveled into her eyes, as though she was smiling with her entire being. That single smile planted a seed inside me, a dangerous seed, because from that moment on, I wanted more. Our conversations began simply. Short exchanges, casual remarks, words that carried no weight, but left me strangely restless afterward. I would replay them in my mind, dissecting each tone, each look, as though I could find hidden meanings buried inside. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself it was nothing, but deep down, I knew I was lying. One afternoon, she asked me a question that caught me off guard. "What do you dream about?" she said, her voice soft, her eyes fixed on me in a way that made it impossible to look away. For a moment, I froze. Nobody asked me things like that. People usually asked about my work, my plans, my routines. But she wanted to know my dreams, the fragile part of me I had buried for years. "I don't know if I dream anymore," I admitted quietly. "Life has a way of taking those things away." She tilted her head, her expression thoughtful. "Maybe you just need someone to remind you how to dream again." Her words pierced me, sharp and gentle at the same time. 4 hours after she left, they echoed in my head. No one had ever spoken to me like that. No one had ever looked at me as though they saw the part of me I had long since abandoned. That night, lying awake, I realized something terrifying. I wanted her to see me. The real me. Not the version I showed to the world, but the man who carried doubts, fears, and silent hopes he never dared to speak. And the fact that I wanted this scared me more than anything else. Chapter 1. The Beginning of Love Part 2. The next few days. I found myself searching for her in places I never noticed before. A corner of the cafe, the library steps, the park bench under the old oak tree. Sometimes she was there, sometimes not, but the thought of seeing her became a quiet obsession. I told myself I wasn't waiting, but every time I caught even the smallest glimpse of her, it felt like a victory my heart secretly celebrated. Our exchanges grew longer. No longer just polite greetings, but conversations that stretched into minutes, then hours. She had this way of speaking calm, yet passionate, thoughtful, yet playful, that made time dissolve. I would forget where I was, forget the world around me, until it was only her voice filling the air. One evening, as the sun sank into the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and crimson. We found ourselves walking together. Neither of us had planned it. It just happened, like so many of the things between us. The silence was comfortable, not awkward. I could hear the rhythm of her footsteps next to mine, and it felt strangely right, as though we had been walking side by side our entire lives without knowing it. She asked me about my childhood, and I told her stories I hadn't shared in years. Memories of simpler times, of laughter, of loss. She listened not with pity, but with an understanding that made me feel safe. When she spoke of her own past, her struggles, her small victories, I realized how much of herself she was trusting me with. That trust did something to me. It broke down walls I had carefully built around my heart. Walls meant to keep me safe, but which had also kept me alone. And the more she spoke, the more I wanted to tear those walls down, piece by piece, until nothing separated us. One night, unable to contain the weight of what I felt, I asked her, "Do you ever think about love?" She laughed softly, the sound carrying both shyness and honesty. "All the time," she said, "but I don't know if I believe in it the way people describe it. Fairy tales make it sound so easy. Real love, it feels like it has to be something deeper, something harder, something you fight for." Her words sank into me like truth I had always known but never dared to speak. I wanted to tell her right then how much she already meant to me, how her presence alone had reshaped the way I saw the world, but the words stuck in my throat, too heavy, too soon. Instead, I just nodded, hiding the storm inside me. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, and with every moment we shared, the feeling grew stronger. I began to crave her presence, not in desperation, but in a quiet, steady way, as though she had become part of my life, without permission, without force. Her laughter became the sound I looked forward to. Her silence, when shared with me, became a comfort I didn't know I needed. One evening, rain poured down from the sky, drenching the streets in silver. We found ourselves under the same awning, pressed close together as the storm raged around us. The sound of water hitting the ground drowned out the world, leaving only her and me. She looked at me, then really looked at me, and for a moment, it felt as if time itself had stopped. Her eyes searched mine, unspoken words hanging between us. I wanted to speak, to confess, but I couldn't. It was her who finally broke the silence. "Sometimes," she whispered, "I think I've been waiting for this. For someone who makes the world feel less heavy." My chest tightened, my throat dry. I wanted to say, "That's what you are to me." But the words didn't come. Instead, I reached for her hand, hesitantly at first, afraid she might pull away. She didn't. She held on, her fingers intertwining with mine, and in that simple act, something inside me broke open. From that night, I knew there was no going back. After that night in the rain, something changed between us. We never spoke about it directly, never named it, but the silence carried meaning. When our hands touched, it wasn't by accident anymore. When our eyes met, neither of us looked away. It was as if we had entered a quiet agreement that whatever this was, it was real, and it was ours. I began to notice the little things more deeply. The way she bit her lip when she was lost in thought. The way her laughter could brighten even the darkest day. The way her presence alone seemed to soften the sharp edges of my world. She had become a rhythm in my life, one I didn't want to lose. One afternoon, as we sat together watching people pass by, she turned to me suddenly and asked, "Do you believe in destiny?" The question startled me. I thought about it for a moment before answering. I used to think life was just choices and consequences, but lately, I don't know. Lately it feels like some things are meant to happen, no matter what. She smiled faintly, her eyes glistening with unspoken thoughts. "I wonder if we were meant to meet," she said softly. Her words struck me with a force I couldn't explain. I wanted to tell her that I had wondered the same thing 1,000 times. that meeting her felt less like chance and more like fate pulling two threads together. Instead, I just whispered, maybe we were. There were nights when I couldn't sleep. When I lay awake thinking about her, I would imagine the future, fragile as glass, with her by my side. I would picture mornings with her laughter filling the room, evenings with her hand resting in mine, and everything in between. It was foolish, perhaps, to dream so much. But for the first time in years, I allowed myself to dream, because she had given me permission to. One evening, we sat by the river, the water reflecting the golden glow of the setting sun. She leaned her head against my shoulder, and I felt my entire body tremble with the weight of the moment. I didn't move, afraid that if I did, the spell would break. "Do you ever feel scared?" she asked suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. "All the time," I admitted. "But being with you, it makes the fear feel smaller." She lifted her head then, her eyes meeting mine. There was vulnerability in her gaze, a question she didn't ask aloud, but which I could feel in my chest. My heart pounded, my breath unsteady. For a moment, I thought she might close the space between us, and I prayed she would. But instead, she looked away, her lips pressing into a faint smile. "I'm glad," she said, "because I feel the same." That night, walking home alone, I replayed every word, every look, every breath we had shared. My heart was a storm, and she was at the center of it. I knew then that I was falling, truly falling, and there was no way to stop it. Still, a shadow lingered at the edges of my happiness. Love, as beautiful as it was, carried a weight I couldn't ignore. I feared the day when reality would come knocking, when the world would test us, when the fragile dream we were building might shatter. But for now, I held on to the sweetness of the present, unwilling to let fear steal what joy I had found, because with her, even the smallest moments felt eternal. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, but the feeling inside me never dimmed. If anything, it grew stronger, like fire fed by every glance, every word, every quiet moment we shared. I had never known that love could be both so gentle and so overwhelming at the same time. One morning I found myself walking to meet her earlier than planned. I told myself it was just coincidence, but the truth was simple. I couldn't wait. When I saw her from a distance, standing there, sunlight brushing across her face, I felt my breath catch in my throat. She wasn't doing anything special, just waiting, her hair caught in the wind, her eyes scanning the street. Yet in that moment, I thought, this is what beauty truly means. She noticed me, and her smile lit up the space between us. That smile, it had become my undoing. Every time I saw it, I lost another piece of the armor I had built around my heart. "Why are you so early today?" she teased when I reached her. I laughed, though my voice was unsteady. "Maybe I just couldn't wait to see you." Her cheeks flushed ever so slightly, and she looked away, but I could see the corner of her lips curve into a shy smile. That small reaction was enough to send waves of warmth rushing through me. As we walked together, our conversation flowed effortlessly. She told me about her day, the small frustrations, the little joys. I listened intently, realizing how much I loved even the simplest details of her life. To know her routines, her thoughts, her quirks, it felt like a privilege, one I never wanted to lose. Later, we sat together in the quiet corner of a cafe, the air filled with the faint hum of music and the clinking of cups. She stirred her coffee absent-mindedly, her eyes fixed on the swirling liquid. "Sometimes I wonder," she said softly, "if happiness is ever meant to last, or if it's just borrowed moments, destined to fade." Her words sank into me like a stone in water. I could feel the weight of her question, the hidden sadness behind it. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond, but then I reached across the table, my fingers brushing hers. "Maybe happiness doesn't have to last forever," I said gently. "Maybe it's enough that we have it now, that in this moment, it's real." She looked up, her eyes searching mine, and for a heartbeat, It felt as though the world had stilled around us. No noise, no movement, just her and me, and the fragile truth hanging between us. In that silence, I realized something undeniable. I loved her. Not in passing, not in fantasy, but in a way that consumed me completely. That night, lying in bed, I turned the words over in my mind. I love her. I whispered them into the darkness, testing the sound, letting it echo back to me. It was both terrifying and liberating to admit, because love wasn't safe. Love meant vulnerability, risk, the chance of heartbreak. But it also meant life, in its rawest, truest form. The more I thought about it, the more certain I became. I couldn't keep it inside forever. She deserved to know. So the next evening, as we walked by the river under the soft glow of the moon, I gathered the courage I had been avoiding. My hands trembled, my voice almost broke, but I forced the words out. I need to tell you something, I began. She turned to me, her eyes wide, waiting. My heart pounded against my ribs, but I pushed forward. I think I'm in love with you. The words hung in the air, heavy, unshakable. For a moment, fear clawed at me, whispering that I had made a mistake. But then, slowly, her lips curved into a tender smile. I was hoping you'd say that, she whispered. Relief washed over me, stronger than any wave I had ever felt. She reached for my hand, holding it tightly, and in that simple gesture, I knew everything had changed. That night, I walked her home, every step filled with a new kind of joy, a new kind of hope. Love was no longer just a dream, no longer a secret buried inside me. It was real. It was ours. And though I didn't know what the future would bring, in that moment, I felt invincible. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid to fall. Love, once confessed, changes everything. The silence that had once carried unspoken questions was now filled with certainty. No longer did I have to wonder if she felt the same. No longer did I need to hide the storm inside me. We had spoken the truth aloud, and in doing so, we had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The days that followed were unlike anything I had ever known. The world itself seemed brighter, as though the colors of life had sharpened. The smallest things carried meaning: the brush of her hand against mine, the way her laughter spilled out without restraint, the way she said my name as if it belonged only to her lips. One morning, we met at the cafe where we often sat. She arrived before me, and when I saw her waiting at the corner table, her fingers lightly tracing the rim of her cup, my chest filled with a warmth I couldn't contain. "You're early," I said, smiling as I slid into the chair opposite her. She tilted her head, her eyes glimmering with mischief. "Maybe I couldn't wait to see you." The words, though simple, struck me with a force I hadn't expected. To know that she anticipated me, that she longed for me as I did for her, it was enough to make my heart stumble. We spoke for hours that morning, about everything and nothing. She told me about her childhood dreams, how she once believed she would grow up to be a painter, how she used to sketch the world in colors only she could see. I told her about my own dreams, the ones I had buried long ago, the ones I hadn't dared to share with anyone. She listened with the same sincerity as always, her eyes fixed on me as though every word mattered. "Why did you stop dreaming?" she asked softly. I hesitated, searching for the right words. "Because dreaming hurts when life keeps taking things away." I thought if I stopped hoping, I couldn't be disappointed anymore. She reached across the table then, her hand covering mine. "But if you stop hoping, you stop living. Maybe it's time you let yourself hope again." Her words stayed with me long after we left the cafe. That was her gift. She had a way of speaking truths so simple, yet so profound. They carved themselves into my soul. That evening, we walked together along the riverbank, the same place where I had confessed my love. The memory of that night still lingered in the air, and I felt the weight of it as we strolled in silence. "Do you ever wonder where this will go?" she asked suddenly. Her question caught me off guard. I turned to her, seeing both curiosity and fear in her eyes. Every day, I admitted. But I don't want to know the ending yet. I just want to live it. She smiled faintly, her eyes softening. Me too. We sat down on the steps near the water, our shoulders brushing, our hands finding each other naturally. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of the river, but with her beside me, I felt nothing but warmth. I used to think love was just a story people told themselves, she whispered. But with you, it feels real. Scary, but real. I tightened my grip on her hand. It is real, and no matter what comes, I want you to know, I'm not going anywhere. She leaned her head against my shoulder then, and we stayed like that for what felt like forever, two souls bound by promises we didn't need to speak aloud. That night, as I lay awake, I realized something deeper. Love was no longer just about passion or desire. It was about building, about sharing, about becoming part of each other's worlds. And though I didn't know what trials lay ahead, I knew one thing for certain. She was no longer just someone I loved. She was becoming the very center of my life. The following weeks felt like a dream. Every moment I spent with her deepened. The bond between us, weaving our lives together in ways I hadn't thought possible. It was as though the walls I had built around my heart for years were crumbling, brick by brick, under the simple force of her presence. We found excuses to meet, though excuses weren't truly necessary anymore. Even the smallest gatherings became sacred. An evening walk, a cup of tea shared in silence. An accidental brush of hands each held a meaning I could never fully explain. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, I found her waiting for me on a quiet bench near the park. She had a book in her hands, but her gaze was far away, lost in some thought I couldn't see. "What are you thinking about?" I asked, as I sat beside her. She glanced at me, her lips curving into a half-smile. "About us, about how fast everything feels. Doesn't it scare you?" I paused. "It does. But what scares me more is the thought of never having this, of not knowing what it feels like to love you." Her eyes softened, and she closed the book, resting it on her lap. "Sometimes I wonder if we're breaking rules we can't see. That maybe life won't let us have this happiness for too long." I took her hand gently, intertwining our fingers. "Maybe happiness is always fleeting, but that doesn't mean we should deny it when it comes." Her silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was thoughtful. She leaned her head against me, and for a long time, we simply watched the fading light. Days passed, and we shared more of ourselves with each other. She told me about her fears, the nights she couldn't sleep, haunted by the thought of not being enough, of making choices that could hurt us both. I listened, every word etching itself into me, every confession binding me closer to her. "Why do you trust me with all this?" I asked one night, as we walked slowly through the quiet streets. "Because you see me?" she whispered. "Not the version the world wants, not the mask I wear, just me. And no one else has ever done that." I stopped walking and turned to her. "That's because I don't want anyone else. Just you. Always. You." The tears in her eyes shimmered in the dim streetlight, and without a word, she wrapped her arms around me. It was the kind of embrace that spoke louder than vows, the kind that told me she was mine in ways she could never say aloud. But with closeness came vulnerability. Arguments arose, small at first misunderstandings about time, about priorities, about words spoken in haste. Once, after a heated exchange, she walked away, leaving me staring after her with a hollow ache in my chest. I feared I had lost her. Yet the very next morning, she returned, her voice trembling as she whispered, "I don't ever want to lose you. Even when I'm angry, even when I'm scared, you're the only person I want to run back to." I held her tightly, relief flooding through me. "Then we'll fight, we'll hurt, but we'll always come back. That's what love is, isn't it?" She nodded against my chest. "Yes, it's choosing each other, again and again." As time moved on, our love grew deeper, layered with laughter, tears, dreams, and even the shadows of fear. She became the rhythm of my days, the reason behind every smile, and the thought that carried me through every night. One evening, as we sat by the river where so many of our memories were born, she whispered, "Do you think we'll last?" I looked at her, the woman who had changed everything in my life, and answered with a certainty I didn't know I had. Yes, because even if the world tries to tear us apart, my love for you will always find a way back. Her hand trembled in mine, but her smile was steady. Then I'll believe it too. In that moment, I realized love wasn't just something. We felt it was something we built, piece by piece, with patience, forgiveness, and unwavering devotion. And though I didn't yet know what storms awaited us, I knew one thing: I was ready to face them all, as long as she was by my side. I thought loving her would be the simplest thing I ever did. I was wrong. Loving her was simple, in feeling, but everything around that feeling made it complicated. Bills, time, other people's expectations, the small practicalities that quietly chipped away at the edges of what we had. The first months were all sweetness and small rebellions against the world. Then the world, patient and relentless, began to press back. It started with tiny shifts I convinced myself were normal. She began answering my messages later, sometimes not at all for whole afternoons. She smiled in a way that looked practiced, like someone mouthing lines she'd rehearsed in front of a mirror. When I asked if she was tired, she said yes, and lifted her shoulders, but there was always a hesitation before she lied. That hesitation grew into a space between us, not a physical distance, but a coldness that sat under our conversations, like an undertow. I tried to name what scared me and failed each time. Was I jealous? Of whom? Of the job that demanded her attention, of the life she sometimes mentioned as a possibility, comfort, stability, a future that required choices I could not promise. I told myself not to be foolish. We had survived doubts before. We had promised one another that the hardest things would not pull us apart. But promises are easy, in nights bright with warmth. They crack under daylight. There was an afternoon when the crack became more visible. She had been quiet for days, and finally invited me to her apartment. She'd said she needed to talk, and the words "we need to talk" fit in my mouth like a stone. When I arrived, the apartment smelled faintly of citrus and another perfume that wasn't hers. I waited with my hands folded, and when she opened the door, there was a flicker of surprise before she smiled. She moved as if rehearsed. She offered me tea. I sipped, watching everything. The way her fingers found the rim of the cup, the way she avoided my eyes. When we sat, she said gently, "There are things I have to handle, responsibilities I can't ignore." I asked, "What responsibilities?" And she told me about a plan she hadn't spoken of before, a job offer, a possibility to move, a decision to secure a future. She spoke in practical sentences, numbers and logistics that had no place with the language of our nights. She asked if I would support her choice. I wanted to answer with bravery, with that fierce loyalty I felt. But a raw realization rose in my chest. Support could mean letting go. I remember standing in her doorway after she left me that evening, the corridor light painting my shoes in a thin band of brightness, and thinking how ordinary everything looked. The world carried on, indifferent. The neighbors laughed somewhere down the hallway. I was the one trembling, not from cold but from loss. I had not lost her that night, not concretely, but I had watched the scaffolding of our shared life begin to shift. After that, routine became an enemy. She filled her days with meetings and promises to call later. I learned the calendar of her absence: mornings for work, afternoons for commitments, evenings for whatever exhaustion allowed. We still met, but our meetings had the pressure of urgency. We crammed conversations into stolen pockets of time, trying to fit everything we were into short breaths. The depth we had once found in long evenings blurred into fragments, fragmentary jokes over tea, apology-filled texts typed hurriedly between tasks, A voice message left when there was time to speak. I found myself counting margins, minutes between calls, the length of a pause before she texted back, the frequency of her laughter now when we were together. I tried to be patient. I told myself that love is endurance, that this is a test and I must pass it by holding steady. But endurance does not always translate to happiness. Endurance sometimes becomes a slow erasure when one holds on longer than is healthy. One night, after too many small silences stacked in a row, I told her the truth. I had been wearing like a bruise. I said I felt distant, that her absences had begun to feel permanent. She looked at me for a long time. Then she took my hand in both of hers and said, "I never wanted this for us." Her voice was honest, and the honesty was its own kind of pain. She confessed that some doors had opened, offers, promises of an easier life, things she had once vowed she wouldn't choose over us. She said she was torn between what she felt and what seemed secure. Hearing it did not soften me as I expected. It hardened me, not out of spite, but out of recognition. I realized I could not compete with a future already written in contracts and scheduled meetings. I could only be an unplanned chapter in the story she was beginning to edit. That knowledge unsettled me more than any argument ever could. A week later, a photograph arrived on my phone. Not meant for me, I learned, but the cosmos has a way of arranging accidents. It showed her in a polished suit, standing with others at an event I had no invitation to. She was smiling in the picture, bright and practiced, and beside her was a person who hailed from the world she now moved in, a world of boardroom light and curated ease. I stared at that image until the glow of my screen burned my retinas. My mind invented the rest of the scene. Conversations about strategy, polite toasts, laughter that left no trace of us. I deleted the image before I had even looked properly. Deletion felt like a small rebellion. I told myself not to be ridiculous, that one photograph could not mean anything definitive. But it settled like a stone at the bottom of my stomach, a weight I could not ignore. I started to catch myself imagining versions of her life that did not have me in them. I imagined her waking without me, making decisions without my counsel, slipping into routines where my jokes and my old arguments were no longer relevant. Each image was like a map of erasure. We had always promised each other honesty, so when I finally spoke, it was not to accuse, but to open a wound. I asked if she was choosing a life I could not be part of. She looked away and said that she was considering a path that would bring security for her family, for her future. She admitted fear of debt, fear of instability, fear of staying with an uncertain lover while opportunity knocked with a well-dressed hand. She admitted greed for comfort, not as malice but as a survival strategy. She told me she wanted both, to keep what we had and to accept the life offered. The sentence hung between us like a paradox. How does one hold a paradox? How do you maintain a love that lives alongside an option to leave? I tried to be the kind of person who could accept ambiguity, who could love through division and still feel whole. But my quiet self began to fray. I became vigilant in ways I never wanted to be, taking notice of silence as if it were an action, parsing explanations as if they were evidence. Each time she explained, I appreciated the effort and also felt the chisel at the edge of what we were carving together. There were arguments, of course. Words said in panic, phrases thrown like small knives. She would say, "I am not choosing money over you," and I would reply, "Then choose me." She would cry and insist this was not a choice. Between love and comfort, but a knot of obligations she had to untangle. I wanted to untangle it with her. I wanted to say, "We can do this together." But often the answer was logistics, and logistics rarely bend for love. And yet, even amid the friction, there were nights where she returned wholly to me. She would put her head on my chest and we would breathe until the tension eased. On those nights, I believed we could outrun the encroaching distance. The problem was that those nights did not erase the days that followed, the days when she was absent in ways that mattered most. One afternoon, an old friend of hers reached out, A simple message. Are you free for coffee? I have something to propose. The way she showed the message to me made it worse. It was casual, like many things were now. Casual, but with the flavor of decision. Her fingers hesitated over the screen before she swiped to accept. She looked at me, and in that look there was a calculation I could not read. She reassured me, as always, with softness. But there is a point where reassurances ring hollow, because the sound does not match the actions. I began to dream less. The imagination that once bloomed at the edge of my experience slackened and then stopped. I would try to picture a future, houses, laughter, children maybe, and the photograph I had deleted would seep into each frame. She at a podium thanking colleagues, me clapping in the audience. I would wake with the feeling that the future was slipping like sand through my fingers. Still, there were moments of grace. She would sometimes send me a note in the morning, thinking of you, or I miss your stupid jokes. Those tiny messages felt like anchors tossed into rough water. I clung to them, grateful and also resentful for their insufficiency. The love was still there. I could feel it in the warmth of her hand, the crinkle at her eyes when she laughed. But love, I came to learn, is not always a lever you can use to hoist someone out of a life they have already set a course toward. A turning point happened not through fury but through quiet observation. I watched her one night across a room full of people, bright lights, polite applause, the hum of conversation. She was lovely, in that way that makes strangers take notice. Men and women approached to congratulate her. She navigated the attention with grace. I felt pride first, then a strange prickling sorrow, as if I were an observer at my own funeral. I understood, in a clear, sudden flash, that the life she was entering would respect her in ways mine never had the power to. I wanted to be proud and not possessive, but possession is a human thing, and I could not help it. I wanted a world that celebrated her with me in it, not instead of me. I tried to speak, to build bridges. I proposed small compromises, ideas that sounded reasonable to me, shared plans for weekends, commitments we could both keep, an agreement that she would not let opportunities sever us without trying every alternative. She listened with the patience of someone solving a puzzle already nearly complete. She nodded and promised and hugged me, but the puzzle pieces were changing shape in her hands in ways she hadn't told me. She loved me, she said, but she feared a future that was uncertain and had a responsibility to accept stability when it was offered. When acceptance becomes the strategy, it is hard to fault the actor. She made choices with eyes wide open, and I watched those choices alter the texture of what we were. I still loved her. I still reached for her. But I began to keep a ledger in my head. Efforts made, opportunities accepted, time given. The ledger is a quiet thing that corrodes trust. It turns affection into accounting, warmth into debt. There were nights I lay awake and rehearsed how I would ask her to stay. I crafted sentences that sounded noble in my mind, appeals to the heart, reminders that comfort without love is hollow, arguments about the courage to be poor together and rich in affection. I plotted how I would make it work. But the reality of adulthood is that plans require money, stability, and 1,000 small certainties. My arguments sounded romantic and insufficient when the bills arrived and the choices had to be made. And so the cracks grew, not dramatically, but in the way a house can fail slowly when moisture finds a seam. They widened imperceptibly, then suddenly enough that we noticed the draft. We still loved each other, fiercely at times. But the fierce love lived beside a cautious, practical mind that leaned toward survival. I could not help but wonder if love alone would be enough to mend the fissures reality had made. The more I tried to hold us together, the more fragile we became. Love is supposed to be a shield, but at times it felt like thin glass, beautiful in the sunlight, but too easily cracked by the smallest pressure. I told myself that if I just gave more patience, more understanding, more forgiveness, then maybe we could survive. But love does not always respond to effort. Sometimes it withers under it. She began apologizing too often. I'm sorry I couldn't make it. I'm sorry I forgot. I'm sorry I didn't call. Each apology was like a stitch, but the fabric beneath was tearing faster than her words could mend. And still, when she looked at me with those tired, guilty eyes, I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that her absences were mistakes, not choices. One evening, she arrived late to meet me, hours late. I had been pacing in the rain, waiting, the sky pouring as though mocking my patience. When she finally appeared, her clothes were dry, too dry for someone who claimed she had been caught in traffic. I stared at her, words burning in my throat, but when she took my hand and whispered, "Please don't ask me tonight," I swallowed my anger. I told myself, love required silence. But silence grows heavy. It fills the space where truth should live. And soon, silence became our third companion. I began noticing things I never wanted to notice. A message she read and quickly deleted. A name she mentioned with too much care. A smile that lingered even when she thought I wasn't watching. These were small things. So small, they could mean nothing at all. Yet together, they became a storm inside me. I confronted her once, gently. "Are you still with me? Or are you drifting somewhere I can't follow?" She froze. Then she smiled. That rehearsed smile again. "Of course, I'm with you. Where else would I be?" I wanted to believe it. God, I wanted to believe it. But love cannot thrive on words alone. The cracks between us widened. Nights we used to spend in endless conversation became short, distracted exchanges. The laughter that once came so easily now felt forced, like an echo of something we used to have. And in the middle of it all, I kept asking myself the same question. Was I losing her to the world she once swore she didn't need? One night, unable to hold my doubts any longer, I spoke. My voice trembled, but I forced the words out. "You told me love would be enough. You told me we'd choose each other no matter what. But lately, it feels like you're choosing everything else. Tell me, am I wrong?" She looked at me, her eyes filling with tears. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, finally, she whispered, "You're not wrong. I don't want to hurt you, but I'm tired of fighting against life. I want stability. I want security. I can't keep pretending that love alone will save us." Her words cut deeper than any blade. I felt my chest tighten, my breath catch. I wanted to argue, to shout that we could build a life together, that we didn't need wealth or comfort as long as we had each other. But the truth was heavier than my denial. She had already made her choice. That night, as she cried in my arms, I realized I was holding someone who was already half gone. She still loved me. I could feel it in the way her body trembled against mine, in the way her hands clutched at me, as though afraid to let go. But love wasn't her anchor anymore. Comfort was. And I, no matter how much I wanted to, could not compete with comfort. The days that followed were a blur. We tried to continue as before, dinners, stolen kisses, quiet mornings together. But everything was tainted with the knowledge of her confession. Each kiss felt like a goodbye. Each embrace felt like a promise she no longer believed in. I started asking myself whether it was better to fight or to let go, better to hold on to a love that was slipping away, or to release it before it shattered completely. There was no easy answer. Love never gives easy answers. The last time we sat by the river, the place where so many of our memories were born, she spoke the words I had dreaded for weeks. "I can't do this anymore." The air left my lungs. I wanted to beg, to plead, to remind her of everything we had survived. But instead, I nodded slowly, because deep down, I had known this moment was coming. She reached for my hand one last time. "I'll always love you, but sometimes love isn't enough." I held her hand, memorizing the shape of her fingers, the warmth of her skin, the tremble in her voice. And then, slowly, I let go. When she walked away, I didn't follow. I couldn't, because I knew chasing her wouldn't bring her back. She had chosen her path, and I was no longer a part of it. After she left, silence became my only companion. It wasn't the gentle silence of comfort, the kind we once shared while lying under the stars. No, this silence was heavy, oppressive, pressing against my chest like an invisible weight. Every corner of my world echoed with her absence. The bed felt colder, the streets lonelier, the nights unbearably long. I told myself I had to move on, that life doesn't wait for broken hearts. But moving on isn't a decision, it's a battle, and I was losing. Each morning, I woke with her memory wrapped around me like a chain. I would reach for my phone, half hoping she might have written, even just a single line, "I miss you." But the screen stayed empty, mocking me with its silence. Friends told me time heals. You'll forget, they said. But forgetting was impossible when every place carried her shadow. The cafe, where we laughed for hours. The park bench, where she admitted her fears. The riverbank where we once whispered promises we thought were unbreakable. They weren't just memories. They were ghosts, and they refused to let me rest. Sometimes, late at night, I argued with myself. Why did you let her go so easily? Because she had already chosen. But couldn't you have fought harder? What good is fighting when the war is already lost? The dialogue circled endlessly inside me, eating away at whatever peace I tried to build. Weeks passed. Then, one afternoon, I saw her again. She wasn't alone. She was walking beside someone else, her laughter ringing through the air, like music I no longer owned. My chest tightened. I froze where I stood, watching the life I used to belong to slip past me in broad daylight. She didn't see me. Or maybe she did, and chose not to. Both possibilities hurt the same. That night, I broke. I cried for the first time since she left, not the quiet tears I had shed before, but deep, racking sobs that shook through my body. I whispered her name into the darkness, as if the night might carry it back to her. It didn't. But in that pain, something shifted. I realized I couldn't keep living as though my happiness depended on her return. Love, I finally understood, doesn't always end with forever. Sometimes it ends with lessons. I began to rebuild, slowly. It started with small steps, a morning walk, a journal filled with words I had never dared to speak aloud, a new book on my bedside table. The world, though dim at first, began to hold color again, and yet, even as I rebuilt, I carried her with me, not as a hope, not as a future, but as a memory etched into the deepest part of who I was. She had taught me the intensity of love, the beauty of connection, and the agony of loss. She had shown me that even when love isn't enough, it is still powerful enough to change us forever. Months later, when I passed the same riverbank where we once sat, I felt no tears. Only a quiet smile. I whispered into the wind, I will always love you, not because you stayed, but because you once chose me. The consequence of love, I realized, isn't just heartbreak. It's growth. It's the scars that remind us we once dared to feel deeply, even when the world warned us not to. It's the courage to walk forward, carrying both the pain and the beauty, knowing that love, even when lost, is never wasted. And so, I let her go fully that day. Not with bitterness, not with regret, but with gratitude. Because she had been my greatest joy and my greatest sorrow. And both had shaped me into someone stronger. Someone who could finally face life not in fear, but in hope. For love, even in its end, had given me something I would carry forever. The knowledge that I had lived, truly lived, in the fire of its light.